Welcome to Manibil, and welcome to my resume of part 3 of Hume's book, A Treatise of Human Nature. And this is sort of, I intend to make a resume of each of the parts of this book as I get through them. And in this part, we are dealing with the relations of ideas. And it's about clarifying the interdependency or dependency and how you get to various ideas based to various of the relations, you could say, right? And what they're based on. And he categorizes these relations into two groups. One is relations that are dependent on ideas. You can't do them without the ideas. And then relations independent of ideas, which is sort of a direct impression of something, right? And I think may have these subtexts to group 1 and 2. These might be incorrect. I think I might have made a mistake there. So please keep them. I think I switched them around. They are switched. They should be opposite. So please bear with me. Maybe I should start this one over, right, and correct the error. Never mind. I think we are on board here, right? The headlines are correct. There are relations dependent on ideas and relations independent of it. Those that are dependent on ideas are resemblance between how do ideas resemble. One cat resemble another cat, or maybe one four-legged animal resembles another four-legged animal. Something like that, right? But you need the ideas first before you can make the resemblance. Then there's sort of quantity or number. It's like, okay, I'm comparing how many are there of the same kind, or a degree of quality. And maybe by that he means something like that if you have one cow and another cow, there might be different shades of the same type of color, right? But we are comparing each of the ideas of the color of the cow and so on, right? And this might be sort of a gray area for him, because the degree of quality, in my opinion, is directly independent on the object, but solely independent on my impression of the sensation of the color and so on, right? But I might have missed his meaning here, right? And honestly, I don't find this to be a good ontology. I don't find it to be a good ontology. I'm more looking like various insights here and there that might fit my bill or fit some kind of insight that could help me do my ontology. I find his ontology to be flawed. I might as well say that outright, right? The dichotomy at the bottom of ideas and impressions are not correct, or it's too simple. And then it gets, and I find that the reason why he gets into these more and more and more cumbersome argumentations for various aspects of these relations, then, that are the ontology should, the relations should fall out of the ontology, rather than, okay, now I created an ontology, now I'm going to add 7 new relations that are sort of dropping from the sky, sort of, right? You see what I mean? And this, he does this constantly by saying, okay, now I'm going to bring in 6, 7 new relations, which I call this, that, this, and the other, right? And it's like, okay, are there overlappings? Might there be overlapping? Might there be more than 7 relations, right? It's like, it's not a good format of arguing, in my opinion. But let's get back into it here. There's contrariety, which I guess is they are different. A cow is not a dog, right? So this kind of a comparison. Then and if we these subtexts, right? So in the top one, the subtext should be the lower one, which is only within mind, no outward connection. No, you don't need an outward. You don't need any impression of any kind to get to the relations that are only dependent on ideas, right? So maybe these headlines are sort of my condensation of his way of using words. Maybe they should be formulated in a more modern language, so that the top one, the relations dependent on ideas, which it's actually it's only dependent on ideas, right? And at the same and it sort of it goes on. You could do that. You can do that sitting in your room. You don't need to go out in the world in order to have. You can sit and resemble a cow with a cat and do these relations and quantity and number and so on. You can do that without the outward connection, so to say. At least that's how I understand his saying, right? Then there's relations independent of ideas. And this is what I call a sort of an outward connection, the only access to knowledge. Knowledge is based on these three lower ones, which is identity, time and place, and causation. Now, I am not too happy about these three parts being knowledge. I'm rejecting that idea, right? But let's get into his of these three. There are two that are direct impression, which is identity, which he means by cow. If you experience cow, you have a direct impression of cow, right? And time and place is apparently, so as far as I can understand, also the direct impression. And I would disagree with that. You could say place is the situation in which you have the identity of that particular idea, right? So yeah, you have to have an impression of the place. The time is a different beast in my opinion, because time is more like, as I say, a distance, a mental distance between experiences or memories of experiences and memories of situations, right? And time is not an impression of any kind. So I might have got it wrong, but this is how I understood him, right? And then the last one, which is the most cumbersome one, right? The inferred relation of independent ideas, right? It's like you're not dependent on some ideas in order to get to causation. You can go and you have to watch. There are no actions in your mind as such. You have to experience actions or changes in situations, and therefore he says, I have to experience causation. Maybe I can work from an abstract idea of causation, which he actually does when he's philosophizing about it, you could say, right? But in order to have that direct impression, where I might be violating the term impression here, right, of causation, I have to experience a situation. So that's why he says it independent of ideas, in the sense that it's not the idea of what is going on. I can experience that directly somehow. I would just say I disagree. I don't think causation is some kind of, it's a comparison between memories, right? You compare one, as I've stated in an earlier part, right, that it's more like, how should I put it? it's more like a it's derived from the mind. It's derived from the mind searching for this kind of pattern without me really deciding to do so. I'm not. It's not a philosophical thing going on. I'm not sitting down now. I have to figure this out because I don't know why. But my mind does it on its own accord. That's the best way I can describe it. And then I apply this connection after the fact. Though I can have a situation where I try to predict that I have which I would consider a cause. I expect the effect, but that's based purely on imagination. From that extraction from these particular memories that creates this pattern, right? So I use the pattern to say, okay, each time I experience this situation, this next situation followed. So if it's beneficial, the second situation is more beneficial to me than the first situation. I may create the first situation in order to get the second situation, right? Because I believe that it will happen because of my prior experiences. You can say that he might not be clear of when he is talking after the fact, saying, well, it happened again, sort of, right? Therefore causation. Or he's saying, I want to use this to my benefit and use a prediction based on this causation, right? So it's, and to get more into his way of it's a very, 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 very long-winded and cumbersome way of arguing, as I've written a little text here. Hume discusses causation at length, obviously since this aspect has a unique position in his ontology. I would argue, after reading the part, that it might be closer to a relation of ideas rather than a matter of fact. Inquiry formulation of the information. I don't know what I've written there of the same. That's of the same topic. Yeah. He doesn't call it relation of ideas and matters of fact, but later when he rewrites this first part of his, the first book or first part of the first book of the treatise, he uses different terms. He calls it relation of ideas and matters of fact. These two groupings here, right? That's why I call it the inquiry in formulation of the same topic. Okay. I forgot that was what I was trying to say, right? He seems to force his philosophy rather than being neutral. It's like he says, okay, I have this idea of causation and now I'm going to explain it to you, right? So it's sort of reverse kind of philosophy where he says, I need to go here and now I'm going to give you some philosophy. That's an appeal to connecting the dots in the way you want to, right? I like philosophy where you somehow get to a starting point, whatever you want to call that, the reduction base or whatever, right? And then you build from that, and various aspects of your philosophy sort of drops out of your argumentation. Rather than saying, okay, so now I need to go to causation, and I'm going to give you 50 pages of argumentation for that. That seems like it's an agenda, right? So I'm right here. The causation part suffers much, it is cumbersome, from his imperfect ontology, in my opinion. And he ends up arguing for an inferred necessary connection towards the impression, right? Which is not too clear how he arrives at. It's a sort of a belief or something, right? This part 3 seems very much driven by an agenda to use it to push against religious belief. And I sort of, I know that my opinion is that the inference of causation has become notorious or famous, not necessarily because it's good argumentation and brilliant philosophy, but because it's controversial. Right? It's controversial that causation is not something that exists, right? And maybe not in inference, but it alludes to the problems of induction, because induction is based, you could say, on it alludes to his other controversial thing, which is a critique of induction, right? So I think that these aspects are so associated with Hume that these particular chapters have become sort of blown out of proportion. And because they are controversial and quite unique in their approach, they have become sort of a settled in marble, right? Rather than people scrutinizing what is he actually doing in the philosophy. Is it rigid philosophy? And honestly, I don't find it too good, right? I'm not sort of convinced of his approach. Now, I would still say that causation is something that I add to it, right? I add causation to the picture. I'm not in control of whether or not a rock is going to fall from the tree or whatever, right? The cat is going to fall from the tree, or find something more neutral, right? Don't want to hurt any cats. Don't do this at home, right? If I drop, I drop my keys, right? If I can't decide, I can't know if they will drop. I have an idea that they will drop because that's what it's been doing all the time through my life when I did that, right? So I expect it to be the case, but I can't know it's the case before it is the case. And another thing is, he's pointing to, I'm creating a movie that says this thing is moving from A to B, right? But I cannot possibly be experiencing the moving. I am experiencing snapshots in a way that I stitch together to this story, because I have experienced there, I experienced there, I experienced there. But when I'm sort of halfway in experience, I don't have this prior experience anymore, right? Those are purely memories, and my expectation of what is going to happen is still a part of the future, right? So it's these snapshots that my mind creates a coherent story about. And that story is where the difference is between whether or not you think causation is a part of that world you're experiencing and the mind adding it, right? Obviously, to me, the mind is adding all this story because you only have the snapshot at that particular time, right? And time itself is the mind's way of spreading out these, let's say, events, so that you have the sense of it is creating, in order to not that all experiences are lumped on top of each other at the same time, so to say. They are stretched out in order to, in the mind, stretched out to give this, for whatever reason, right? To give it a causal structure, you could say. Why does it? I can't get to, but I can say it's useful to me, right? That I can do it. Apparently, I mean, it seems to work, right? But you cannot get to the foundations of it, and I think that he is trying to push causation out there, right? In an external world that obviously, to me, he doesn't have access to, because it needs it to be there in order to have some predictive quality to an external world that is sort of set in marble, or set in a scientific structure that is based on causality. So it's a skeptical approach. At the same time, he seems to be directed by a similar kind of mantra that is the materialist, physicalist, scientific approach to an external world, right? Okay, maybe I'm rambling a bit here, but I hope it makes sense. It's a very cumbersome chapter to or part to get through, in my opinion. It's very bloated, in my opinion. It doesn't need to be this. And whenever, in my opinion, when philosophy gets bloated, it's a sign of problems, right? If you have to spend huge amounts of text in order to get to an explanation of what you're doing, it might point in the direction that there's some problem somewhere, right? And I think that the problem is the foundational ontology is dysfunctional, or that sounds a little, maybe a little too hard, right? But it is not correct. It's, how should I put it? It's not sufficient. It's not sufficiently detailed. He's on the right track, I would say, right? He's goes in the right direction. He just goes wrong in this direction, right? He's headed towards, Paris, but he ends up somewhere in Germany, right? But his idea of going to Paris, sort of in the metaphor, is correct. He just ends up somewhere else, right? In my opinion. And all these relations that there are is, to me, the same as saying he's not doing his ontology correctly, because these relations have dependency of some kind. And that dependency should be a description of the ontology. You could say that's what he's doing here. But he's still working with the ontology in either this box or that box. Ideas, impressions, and then sort of moving between with the inferences and sort of something that is you need an impression of and don't need an impression of. It sort of becomes sort of I have lost the structure of this, right? As soon as we start to go across ideas and impression and sort of then I lose track of what we're doing, and it seems like he's created a structure that he can sort of violate anyway, right? I would like in ontology to be, if you have this level in your ontology, you can't get to the next level without explaining what it is about this first level that makes you able to go to the next level, right? There's no going various weird ways in your ontology, and that's what I see from this one, right? So I think I'll leave it at there. Hope it helps with a bit of overview, right? This is sort of the best I can do with how far I got into it, and I would have to admit that in some significant parts I was kind of lost in his language, and this sort of my resume here might suffer a bit from that, right? Okay, so and sorry for the errors in my presentation, right? The subtext of each of these, this one and this one, should be switched. They should be, exchanged, right? As far as I understand, right? So the relation dependent on ideas only, right? So these on top here are the relation of ideas, and these down here are matters of fact. And it's only where there's a matter of fact that you can have knowledge. And I would agree with that to some extent, only that it's very hard to get what he means by fact. And a fact must be a relation to knowledge, right? Otherwise it can't be a fact. So what it is that is actually knowledge, it's not really clear yet, in my opinion, and he leaves it so far up to the reader to sort of come up with his or her own idea, I think, right? Okay, see you in the next one.